The White House has indicated that they're going to take this right to the top. And when asked if they were willing to, quote unquote, bankrupt the BBC, the White House said emphatically yes. So the war of words is still on.
It is that time of night when we cross the pond to the White House, Washington and beyond for the very latest in US politics. And we're joined by Anita Powell, who's a US-based reporter. Anita, good evening to you.
Hi, Kate.
Just seeing a bit of news here that the BBC has apologised now to the US President Donald Trump. The deadline was tomorrow, wasn't it, for a panorama episode which spliced parts of speeches that Donald Trump made on January the 6th, the date, of course, of the Capitol insurrection. The BBC has rejected, though, Donald Trump's demands for compensation. The BBC say they won't show the programme again. This is, of course, after the threat that Donald Trump made to sue the BBC for $1 billion in damages unless the corporation issues a retraction, apologises and compensates him. Here we go. How bold of the BBC is it to not offer any compensation? Can this be interpreted as an opening move, or is the BBC perhaps saying this is the beginning and end of the matter, Anita?
Well, as you know better than I do, Kate, the UK and the US have very different standards for libel, different damages. And because this panorama show did not actually air in the United States on, the commercial networks that we have available, there's a jurisdictional issue about whether this case could even be heard in the U.S. And of course, the BBC's lawyers are aware of that. So I think I wouldn't read too much into it, but we have heard this very acerbic language from the president, of course, and his request for $1 billion. But it's really not clear what legal pathway he has and what court would even hear this. And it doesn't seem like it could be heard in the UK.
Yeah, you're right about different libel laws, the programme not being available on large networks over in the United States. There was also a second doctored speech video that was revealed earlier by the Telegraph. Not as serious as the Panorama one, but this was a Newsnight piece where Donald Trump is saying the same thing about mentioning congressmen and women and senators. And then it's spliced together to say, and we will fight like hell. So the key bit is, and will march on the Capitol, is missing. So it's not as bad, but it's still an example of an unnecessary splicing together of footage by the BBC. And Donald Trump's legal team this evening accusing the BBC of a pattern of defamation.
And this has escalated, of course. I mean, Caroline Leavitt was asked yesterday if President Trump had spoken to your prime minister, Mr. Starmer, about this. And they've, the White House has indicated that they're going to take this right to the top. And when asked if they were willing to, quote unquote, bankrupt the BBC, the White House said emphatically yes. So the war of words is still on.
Okay, all right. Donald Trump, of course, spoke to Fox News about it this week. I think I have an obligation to do it. This is in reference to the $1 billion lawsuit. You can't allow people to do that. So there you go. For the BBC's part, they have apologised. They will not air the programme again.
And there are two top executives left, and that's very meaningful, I would say.
Yeah. But it seems that they will not compensate him. The BBC has no plans to rebroadcast the documentary. The BBC sincerely regrets the manner in which the video clip was edited, we strongly disagree there is a basis for a defamation claim. And look, they really would have consulted some of the best lawyers out there. So take that, Donald Trump. I wonder how he's going to respond, Anita.
Well, he actually hasn't been responding to any questions in the last 24 hours, which is unusual for President Trump. He's had 2 media encounters, and in that time, he hasn't answered any questions, which, as I said, unusual.
OK, all right, let's talk about the shutdown. The longest US government shutdown in history officially come to the end after Republicans and a splinter group of Democrats finally agreed upon a bill. The bill leaves unresolved the issue of expiring tax credits for the Affordable Care Act, which most Democrats demanded were extended in order for government to reopen. Here's the president's reaction to the long-awaited end to the shutdown.
Today, we're sending a clear message that we will never give in to extortion. It cost the country $1.5 trillion, this little excursion that they took us on. Republicans never wanted a shutdown and voted 15 times for a clean continuation of funding. They deprived more than 1 million government workers from their paychecks and cut off food stamp benefits for millions and millions more Americans in need.
Anita, you were at the White House today. I know you mentioned. What was the mood like there over this?
Pretty subdued. I think this has dragged on longer than any shutdown in U.S. history, and I think this has really battered Washington here. And I mean, as you said, the main issue was not resolved. And what's also really important, as we all in Washington know, the funding only goes through January 30th. So we could be doing this over again in January. So, and Trump just mentioned that this costs 1.5 billion, but the Congressional Budget Office estimates it's cost the United States $7 to $14 billion. And so it's delayed all of these things that Americans expect, things like food benefits, things like air traffic controllers in abundance, or actually just in, proper numbers. And so this has really set back the governance of the United States, or the managing of government. And yeah.
Who are the voters blaming for this?
We've seen polls saying that increasingly, as the shutdown went on, voters began to blame Republicans, but also also Democrats were blamed, which you heard from the president. So the Republican Party was blaming the Democrats, the Democratic Party was blaming the Republicans, and voters were all over the map, although they were leaning later in the shutdown towards blaming Republicans more.
There was, wasn't there, a bit of unrest amongst Democrats at those that had agreed to this. There was a bit of sort of traitor talk going on. Has that settled down now?
Well, in a really weird way, that might be immaterial, because these 8 senators who defected to vote in favor, none of them are going to run in 2026. So they could say all they want, but these people aren't up for re-election. So.
Okay. All right, let's go elsewhere. Secretary of State Marco Rubio has defended the United States strikes on Caribbean drug boats. The UK suspended their intelligence sharing on the back of those US military strikes for fear that the escalation was in violation of international law because it involved military intervention. Here's Rubio reacting to the EU and UK voicing concern over the US's strikes.
I don't think that the European Union gets to determine what international law is. They certainly don't get to determine is how the United States defends its national security. The United States is under attack from organized criminal narco-terrorists in our hemisphere, and the president is responding in the defense of our country. I do find it interesting that all these countries want us to send nuclear-capable Tomahawk missiles to defend Europe, but when the United States positions aircraft carriers in our hemisphere where we live, somehow that's a problem.
Yeah, I mean, does this put a strain on the special relationship? The US and UK have been intelligence sharing in that area of the Caribbean for a long time. It's been a kind of mutually beneficial relationship, I suppose, but it's taken this ramping up of action using military force, striking at will, to put the UK off, to make the UK nervous about the operation.
Not to mention also the Netherlands and Colombia. And also we heard France criticize the U.S. for these strikes, which, of course, as you say, because they involve the military, we don't know as much about them as we would like to know. So I guess, yeah, this would be a visible rupture. But I mean, these are 2 countries that have had a very long relationship, and this is just one element of a very broad relationship. So we're definitely hearing sharp words on all sides, but it really does remain to be seen what the fallout is going to be in the other spheres in which they do share intelligence, namely on the European continent. So I think we need to know a little bit more before and that needs to come, I think, from the leaders in the UK and the US to tell us where this relationship stands. Certainly it is, the OG of relationships between 2 democracies. So it's definitely an important relationship. And yeah.
Are most Americans pretty accepting of those strikes? Because, as we said, it is military force. That is possible because Donald Trump has called the drugs situation with these drug boats a national emergency. So it means that he can execute powers that enable the military to sort of strike whenever they want to, effectively. I mean, that's a very loose way of putting it, but it's sort of what it means.
Americans are just not a monolith, obviously, but I would say that some Americans are very concerned and say that these are extrajudicial strikes. They've echoed the language that Colombia's president has put out there, saying these were fishermen, these were not, legitimate targets. But of course, this is part and parcel of Donald Trump's stance on immigration, which is largely punitive. And so hardcore members of Trump's base have been very supportive of these strikes. So, I mean, but they are the ones who are going to decide who remains in power in the next presidential cycle, in the next congressional cycle. But right now, I guess this is a matter of legality, and that's not really decided by voters, that's decided by courts.
Okay, look, the grandson of John F. Kennedy, Jack Schlossberg, will run for US Congress. That's what he told his supporters on Tuesday. Schlossberg is the only grandson of John F. Kennedy and has come to prominence for his provocative posting online. Here he is speaking to MSNBC about Trump's relationship with his cousin, RFK Jr.
He's so obsessed with the Kennedys and the Kennedy name and the Kennedy brand that he caged one and put it in his cabinet, a rabid dog in his cabinet. Put a collar on my cousin RFK Jr. and has him there barking, spreading lies and spreading misinformation.
Wow, Anita, that's pretty strong.
What a family. I mean, we've heard this before from members of the Kennedy family distancing themselves from RFK Jr., the current health secretary. So this isn't really surprising, but that's very strong language. And of course, invoking a dog is seen by many people as very demeaning. But I don't think that's necessarily going to hamper Schlossberg's interest in this seat. It's very solidly Democratic. The congressman who's leaving is retiring, but this seat has been Democratic since 1961. And before that, it was also very left-leaning, to the point that it was held by actual Socialist Party members in the 1920s. So I don't think that this strong language is going to put off the voters in the 12th congressional district of New York.
Look, the language describing his cousin there as a rabid dog. Look, thank you, Anita. Really great to have you with us. Anita Powell there, who is a DC-based reporter.